let's go ahead and get started. So, now that we feel a little bit more centered, we've arrived here on this cold, snowy night. Kudos, by the way, that so many of you, I know some of you were at yoga before this, but decided to come out for the talk. I feel very honored. Scorpios everywhere, I feel very honored. So starting with some general characteristics of the sign of Scorpio. So there's a lot we could say about every sign, but I think one of the main things that I want to start off with Scorpio is the idea of power. So people of this sign, or who have a lot of this energy in their charts, they tend to be like have a lot of personal power, or kind of a bigger, strong personal presence. They tend to be kind of a force of nature in some ways, but also they can be very enigmatic and kind of mysterious. Scorpios tend to be highly private a lot of the time as well. So it's kind of this interesting balance of people are kind of drawn to them. Sometimes it's in a little bit of a love it or hate it type of way, because they just have a very strong energy, a very strong presence about them. With that comes a lot of self-discipline and self-control if they choose to exercise it, which we all know that sometimes we don't always choose that, no matter what sign we are. But Scorpios do have a great potential for that, and really people who can kind of rise to any occasion, whatever that might be. Additionally, the sign of Scorpio is always concerned with ideas of transformation. So a lot of times that looks like personal transformation, but it can also be using their skills, their talents, their qualities to help bring about transformation in some capacity out in the world as well. So Scorpios tend to love to see like the truth of things, kind of looking beneath the surface or the veneer of what people are saying or what people are doing, and kind of honing in on what are people's true motivations, or what's people's energy, even if it doesn't match with what they're saying, that type of thing. So we always think of, with the archetype of Scorpio, could be like the detective. So if you're a Scorpio and you were ever into those like murder mystery shows or any of that type of stuff, that definitely fits here. Scorpios can be very intuitive as well. That's a water sign, which is one of 4 elements. All the signs fall into either water, air, earth, or fire. So Scorpio is one of the 3 water signs, along with Cancer and Pisces. So with that watery kind of connection to emotion comes sometimes that like psychic or intuitive ability in some senses. The other thing with Scorpios is that they tend to be very deep. So they can be people who don't typically have like a huge wide circle of acquaintances all over town, but rather they prefer to kind of expend their energy creating slightly deeper, kind of more personal, intertwined types of relationships in their life. But they can be fiercely protective, very loyal friends. They're great people to have in your corner. They also make incredibly formidable enemies. So if you ever find yourself on the opposite side of a table from a Scorpio in a negotiation or disagreement of sorts, definitely know that they will bring their A game to whatever it is that they are doing. I think Scorpio too, another key word that I always think of is extreme. So if you have a lot of Scorpio energy in your chart, sometimes you can go from like really high highs, then also to really low lows. So sometimes they tend to swing between those. That can be in their emotions. That can also be kind of in their thoughts and the way that they think. Because the sign of Scorpio is really connected with things that are darker. Like we think of the detective in like a murder mystery case, as I said before, kind of going deeper into the details of things, really checking things out and looking for what's hidden underneath a person, a situation, anything like that in life. So they are not typically afraid of the darkness, to the darkness, whether that's in human nature or in something external out in the world. They're also all kind of taboo things tend to fall under Scorpio's realm as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. So what's interesting about them, as I talked about, they are really loyal, and they do like to have these close, deep relationships, but Scorpios are also very independent people as well. And we can kind of see that the way they operate out in the world, it's kind of one of those like would love to have you, but definitely don't need you kind of energies. So if you know any Scorpios, that might remind you of them. We always talk about how every sign of the zodiac has a positive side of the coin and a challenging side of the coin, right? So when we're feeling our best, we exhibit, of course, the best qualities of whatever our signs happen to be. When we're not feeling so great in and of ourselves, sometimes there's challenging things then that we have to deal with. So for Scorpio, some of those patterns that they can fall into when they're not feeling their best would tend to be things like possessiveness and jealousy. It would be a little bit of like vengefulness. Sometimes if you wrong a Scorpio, they're like, oh, just wait, you know, and the revenge can come kind of swiftly. Scorpios, because they have a lot of personal power and personal magnetism, they sometimes have a heightened ability for manipulation or sort of controlling different situations. They really prefer to be in control. Sometimes I think of like the dominatrix as a very good archetype for Scorpio. So take that or leave that. But yes, so they need to be careful of kind of expressing those qualities when they're not feeling great. I think a great lesson for Scorpio energy is learning how to express your feelings truly and honestly. It's very hard for multiple signs to be vulnerable, but I think Scorpio especially, because if we think of just the animal, the scorpion, it has that hard outer shell and it's got the stinger, right? But inside, it's just a big ball of mush. So you just have to kind of get past those outer defenses. If you can get past the scorpion sting, then you should be all good. A couple other things that Scorpio energy brings that Scorpios need to work on is the idea of fears and paranoia. So this sign, like with that whole idea of going into the darkness, whether that's our own kind of personal psychic exploration or the darkness out in the world, as I was saying before, that can lead to fear. And when we get into that mindset of fear, sometimes that kind of snowballs into that paranoia. And that's one thing they need to kind of watch out for and kind of check themselves on. The last thing is being a little bit fixed. So we always think of, I think when we hear the word stubbornness, if you're familiar with astrology at all, the first sign that might come to mind is Taurus. But Taurus is not the only stubborn sign of the zodiac. I would argue that actually Scorpios are pretty stubborn in the sense that they have very fixed ideals about things. So sometimes they can be slower to change with the introduction of new information, new ideas, that type of thing. But then once they're on it, they're off and running. So that's good. So those are kind of some general characteristics. And if you are a Scorpio, if you know any Scorpio friends or family, it'll be interesting for you to kind of reflect upon those and see if that fits with the people that you know. But I want to kind of transition now into what should we all be doing at this time. So knowing that those are the energies, the qualities, the characteristics of Scorpio in general, what does that mean now from today until November 22nd for these next 30 days of the season? So the first thing that I think everyone should be working on at this time is the idea of purging. So Scorpio also connects to cycles of death and rebirth. That can be in a literal way, but most of the time it's in a figurative way. So I want you to think about in your life, you know, what are you ready to purge? What can start to be transformed in some aspect of self? It can be something as simple as a daily habit or routine that you have. It can be something a little bit deeper. Maybe there's a pattern of behavior or an attitude that you've held for a long time that you're really realizing kind of holds you back more than it allows you to grow. So those are the types of things I want you to be reflecting on a little bit throughout this next 30 days. Where in your life can you do a purge of sorts? The second thing will be, you know, because Scorpio is kind of that deep sign, I want you to think about and notice if your relationships, whether that's friends, family, colleagues, acquaintances, whatever it might be, tend to take on like a little bit of a deeper characteristic or become a little bit more intense in some ways. Maybe that means emotionally intense as well. But I also want people to not be scared of that word. I think sometimes when we hear intensity, we're like, oh, I don't want something that's intense, you know, but knowing that that can be a really great thing too. This is an awesome time to really strengthen the bonds that matter to you most in your life. So thinking about too, who are those people in your inner circle that you love, that you want to put more energy into those relationships and kind of continuing to deepen and grow those connections with people. That's another important thing at this time. We talked about the idea of transformation. So Scorpios, because they can be a little bit fixed sometimes, they tend to carry a lot of tension in their physical bodies. So actually massage is a fabulous thing to treat yourself to during this next 30 days. If you're someone who typically gets body work done, awesome, keep doing what you're doing. If that's not in your realm of normalcy, I would say definitely seek out a practitioner. We have some here. Kim's a great practitioner, and I'm sure she would love to chat with you after class about that stuff. But it is a really good time to just work physical tension out of the body, and maybe in something that's a little deeper. So like a deep tissue massage or shiatsu, or even though Thai massage isn't necessarily deep, it does open up the body in different ways too. So it's a really great time to focus on that. Scorpio is also, being like watery and emotional and deep, it's a very sexual sign. So this is a very sexy time of year, guys, and I want you to be taking advantage of that to its fullest, okay? So I can count on you to do that, I hope. Definitely a great time to explore, because we talked about all things taboo. Like, are you interested in something that might be a little bit out of the norm? This is a very great time of year to explore that a little bit. So whatever that might be for you, let your curiosity roam, and don't be afraid to express yourself kind of in your full sexuality, your full personal power, whatever that means for each of you personally. And then the last thing kind of along that same theme is really looking at how you show up as your most powerful self in your life, or if that might be an area of life that's lacking. So, you know, what do we mean by personal power? It can have a lot of different definitions, but one thing for me, I think for sure, is knowing my strengths and knowing my limitations and honoring those. In the workplace, honoring those in my personal relationships. It can also mean boundary setting. I think that it's being able to set boundaries with others in your life is a very powerful thing. So that can kind of help you step more into that space of personal power as well. And then I think also too, you know, I feel like we live in a culture a little bit that is, it's more comfortable to doubt yourself and to be like, oh, I don't think I'm that good at that. I don't know, somebody else is better at that. I don't, you know, and so I think, yes, there's a time and a place for acknowledging that maybe you aren't the expert in something, or you aren't the master of everything, but also recognizing that each of us has a lot to offer and a lot to give and a lot of wisdom to share with the world. So not being afraid to let that out. I think recognizing, as I said, places where you are still a student and you have more learning to do, but also knowing what it is that you're ready to share and give to the world at this moment, and not being afraid to kind of step into that and let yourself be seen a little bit more for whatever that is for you. So all of those things are really great to be doing over the course of this next 30 days, just in general for everybody. And then I think, you know, looking at, we talked a little bit about the body work, which is important during this time. Sexual release is a great release of energy during this time. But also I would recommend, kind of like we did at the beginning, any type of work that really targets that sacral or second chakra is important during this time, because the sign of Scorpio in the physical body connects to all the reproductive organs, the colon, the anus, kind of how we expel things. So sometimes when the Scorpio energy is heavy, if we're feeling stuck or stagnant, we can deal with issues of maybe we have a block in our creativity. Sometimes literally on the physical level, we can deal with issues of like constipation, or just things not being able to move because we're too fixed, we're too rigid, we're holding on too tightly to something in our lives. So really doing a lot of work with this. We can, you can go to sound baths, which they play different, you know, gongs and singing bowls that attach to different frequencies with the chakras. You can look up stuff on Spotify, on YouTube. If you type in second chakra or sacral chakra, there's a lot of meditations and stuff you can listen to that will help you kind of focus in on that space. And that's a really good one to work with, definitely over the next month as well. Also Reiki, yeah. If you guys do any type of energy work or energy healing, sometimes Reiki practitioners can really hone in on different chakras as well, and that could be a great thing to treat yourself to at this time as well. But then, big upcoming event. So before we talk about the new and the full moon, we have Mercury retrograde. So Mercury is going retrograde on Halloween, so I believe that's next Thursday, and it will be retrograde until November 20th, and it will start to move forward again after that. So if you're not familiar with like scientifically what is a Mercury retrograde, basically all it is that, you know, planets are always revolving around the sun, Earth is always revolving around the sun. When those two orbits cross each other, sometimes it looks in the sky like a planet is moving backwards, which of course we know it's not actually moving backwards, but that's just what it seems like from our perspective. So that's all that a retrograde means. But in astrology, retrograde means that there's the focus on the energy of that planet is really heightened, and we're honing in on that. So Mercury is all about our mind, how we process things, how we think, but Mercury also rules communication, rules technology. So oftentimes during Mercury retrograde, we can encounter challenges with like the computer broke down, the printer's not working, the power went out. It can also be a time of like, we missed an appointment. Like I thought the dentist appointment was Friday, but it turns out it was Wednesday. You know, all these different types of things. I thought I sent the email, but 5 days later I found it in my drafts, you know. So during Mercury retrograde, it's nothing to be afraid of. It's really just, I want you to be mindful that if something a little wonky or crazy does happen to happen to you, don't sweat it. You know, it's all part of this period, and deal with it the best that you can, but don't let it overwhelm you if possible. What Mercury retrograde is an awesome time for, though, is every word that starts with the letters R-E. So, redo, rethink, revisit, review, revise, reinvent, return, all those words are great. So Mercury retrograde, less of a time to push forward and start new things, more of a time to review everything that we already have going on in life and make sure we didn't drop the ball, miss any details, all those types of things. So if you're preparing to sign a contract or anything like that, really reviewing all the details of that, making sure everything's crystal clear, making sure both parties totally understand what's going on. If you're going to start a new job during this time, making sure that you ask all the right questions and that you stay really organized and on top of things, all that good stuff. So it doesn't mean that you absolutely can't start anything new. You know, I don't like to think in absolutes. I would say it's a better time for reviewing, redoing, revisiting things, and then after November 20th, you can kind of push forward onto whatever it is that you want to start. But if you absolutely have to sign a contract, take a job, move, whatever it is, then you have to. And that's all there is to it. So just making sure then that if you have any of those little technology communication snafus, just laugh it off, because it's probably happening also to everybody else. Yeah? One other thing that I would recommend during this Mercury retrograde period, so Halloween through November 20th, would be it's a great time for a psychological deep dive as well. So when we think about Scorpio kind of connecting to the psyche, the deep parts within ourselves, the idea of transformation, that purge, you know, maybe if you've been considering talking with someone, going back to therapy, maybe just getting together with an old trusted friend to work through some things, this can be a really great time for you to revisit any of like the deep issues in life and kind of clear out the cobwebs of whatever's going on in the subconscious or in your mind or things like that. So not being afraid to kind of let any of that out and to be a little bit more vulnerable during this season, that too will help you step a little bit more into your own personal power. So I would definitely recommend that as well. And then we get to the new moon and the full moon. So every month we have a new moon, which is in the same sign as whatever that month is. So since this is Scorpio season, the new moon is going to be in Scorpio. And then 2 weeks after that, the full moon is always in the opposite sign. So Taurus is opposite of Scorpio. So the new moon will be this weekend in Scorpio. The Taurus will be a few weeks later, and that will be a full moon. Starting with this weekend, so it's actually this Sunday, and it peaks right around 5 p.m. Denver time. You don't have to know the exact time. I just share that with you in case you're interested. But basically, you know, we're definitely going to feel that energy on Sunday. But Saturday leading up to it and Monday the day after, those are all kind of potent times for us to kind of use and feel and connect with that new moon energy. This is happening in the early degrees of Scorpio. So new moons are always a time for setting intentions about different things. But I would say that this one especially, connecting to all the things we discussed over the last few minutes, is about setting intentions connected to transformation in some way. What is it time for the death of, so that we can then birth something else new in our lives? So kind of taking a little bit of time at home to think and meditate upon what can that mean for you is important. So I wrote here, what can we positively destroy so that there's room to rebuild? So I've given a couple of you this idea, but I like to think of Scorpio energy too as like the phoenix rising from the ashes, because it's like first you have to get the ashes. Like everything's on fire and it all burns to the ground, but then there's room for you to create something really awesome. So knowing that that destructive process can happen in a really intentional, positive way. We don't have to let it happen to us. We can kind of take control of that and say, I'm ready to change X, Y, or Z things in my life, and you can go from there. But we have a couple other interesting things going on in the sky at the same day as the new moon on Sunday. So there's something happening between Mars and Saturn, which I'm going to be honest, doesn't feel totally comfortable. So if you find yourself kind of frustrated this weekend, just you're working on something and it's not going your way, you're trying to communicate with someone, you know, friend, partner, family member, and you just are not seeing eye to eye, just give it a couple of days, let the energy calm down, and then try again. So that feeling is not going to last if you do happen to experience that. And then the other thing we have happening is we have the full moon over here in Scorpio, and then Uranus is all way at the opposite sign of the zodiac, and it's kind of making an opposition, which means that we could have like a little surprise. Uranus is kind of like a shit disturber in a way. Like small little shocks or surprises or those types of things can happen. But again, it may not be something hugely significant just based on your own personal chart. It will affect each one of us differently. But just, you know, keep your eyes peeled. Don't be surprised if something pops up this weekend that you're like, oh, okay, so that happened. The other things too, that Uranus being tied to this moon can also show that this is a time of, we might feel a little bit more rebellious. We might be looking for a little bit more freedom of personal expression or freedom to express our authentic emotions at this time, which is a very positive thing. But if you're not someone who typically does that, maybe that would be a little surprising to your significant other or your friends or other people who aren't used to seeing you express yourself in that type of way. So that could be another way that this Scorpio new moon energy might play out for you as well. But yes, definitely a great time for intention setting. So I want you to take the next few days to really think about, what are you ready to purge? What are you ready to transform? Yeah? Okay. And then the last thing we have, major thing this month, is, as I mentioned, that full moon that will be in the sign of Taurus. And that is going to happen on November 12th, which is a Tuesday. It's going to happen early in the morning, like 6:30 a.m. I think is when the energy will peak. So as much as the new moon is a time for kind of going inward, being reflective and setting intentions, the full moon is kind of a time of outward culmination of things. It can be a time to celebrate what has come to pass. It can also be a time when emotions are a little more heightened because we're feeling like the light of the moon and it's fun and exciting and all that. You know, like they always say in the hospitals that the ER is always craziest on the day of the full moon. I don't know if you heard that. Or is anybody a teacher in here? Oh yes, there you are. Yeah, so full moon at school, super fun day. I used to be a teacher. But what's nice is, you know, the new moon has a lot more stuff going on this weekend, so we'll feel more energy, I think, now than we will November 12th. November 12th, there's actually going to be a couple planets making some really nice benefic aspects to that full moon. So I think the major theme for that full moon is going to be kind of culminating or starting to have things fall into place with a creative project or something that you've been working on for a while. Taurus energy is really about being steadfast and working hard and trying to accumulate, you know, abundance for yourself. Whether for you that means money, that means more freedom of time, extra resources, however you would define that personally. So it's a really good time to think about how can we start to wrap up certain projects to help bring in some of the abundance that we've been looking for. I think also Taurus is a highly creative sign, and some of the planets that are touching the full moon are also have this very like artistic creative vibe to them. So it could be a really great time to celebrate your own personal creativity or creative projects, any type of endeavor that you've been working on that is all about kind of your personal expression and how you choose to show that out in the world. The full moon can be a really good time to unveil some of that, but it could also be a good time to just, even if you don't want to show that to anybody but yourself, you know, be at home celebrating your creative endeavors and the way that you express yourself uniquely. I think that's important there. Make sure I didn't miss anything here. Yeah, no, I think that's it. I wrote down completing a long-term goal and continuing to put energy into making your dreams a reality. So all those things kind of tying in here mid-November. So yes, a lot of information. Let's take a minute to process that. I'm going to turn this off.